This channel is only possible thanks to direct contributions from viewers like Kronos, Argus, Bleed Red, Christopher Welch, and you. If you'd like to contribute to making more videos like this possible, you can do so for as little as $1 a month on Patreon, or by buying a t-shirt at the merch store. Thanks a bunch, and I hope you enjoy the show. Once upon a time, in the black sprawl of infinity, there was a bubble. Inside that bubble was a universe, and inside that universe was the Earth. Elsewhere, there are other bubbles, and even other Earths, but those are other stories to be told another time. In this bubble, in this world, on this Earth, a young kid is standing alone in their bedroom, and that young kid's name is John Egbert. When we first meet him in Homestuck and PesterQuest, John is a 13-year-old living in a suburban neighborhood of Washington State. Despite having the most normal life of any Homestuck character, John doesn't have any real-life friends, and doesn't even seem to know his neighbors very well. If Homestuck is about anything, it's about online friendship, and the way kids grew up primarily on the internet during a specific period of its history. In that sense, John is the most basic distillation of the kind of person this story is about. Every single one of the characters that will be introduced after him providing different versions of the archetype. That archetype is the internet shut-in. John is a smart, witty kid interested in jokes, pranks, and movies. He likes programming even though it frustrates him, enjoys a reasonable amount of passion for actors like Matthew McConaughey and Nicolas Cage, and occasionally fantasizes about getting to take the lead hero's role in Armageddon. He's also so bad at dealing with his physical reality and the people in it that when you show up at his house, he invites you, a perfect stranger, into his room, only to immediately ignore you to have a long-winded and emotional conversation with his best online friend, Dave. He seriously just goes on and on about whether you're a real mailman with Dave while you presumably mess around with the random birthday cakes and practical magic items dumped all over his room. This might be the earliest and most basic manifestation of his hero title, which marks John as the heir of breath. The breath aspect relates most directly to the realm of thought, reason, logic, and creativity known as the imagination. The special inner magic everybody has, through which anything is possible. Breath is reality as perceived entirely through thought, unbound by the constraints, limits, and sufferings imposed by the real world. Since the internet is basically technology used to make it easy for people to near instantaneously communicate with each other on the level of thought, and his relationship to it is nearly the most important thing in John's life as far as his interests are concerned, we could say he's inherited breath from his peaceful, normal American life. You know, like an heir would. Breath here refers to the internet as a realm of imagination, but also to John's desire to exist there in the first place. Aspirations, both physical and philosophical, are related to breath. It describes the way we take in breath to move our muscles, just as the human will inspires us to chase our dreams and fantasies, guiding us through the world as we try to discover what parts of our imaginations we can make real. John's only source of regular physical interaction is his father, who lovingly showers him in encouraging parental notes of pride and faith. On John's birthday, he also delights in baking John a ridiculous number of delicious cakes and cookies, just like John's dearly departed Nana, the former heiress of a baking megacorporation, used to make for him. A beloved family tradition, upheld. John is so spoiled rotten by candy and pastries that he grows to resent Crocker Corp, loudly complaining about both Betty the Batter Witch's heinous products and his dad's overindulgent behavior to his friends. As soon as any genuine concern is shown, though, he stresses to the reader that he's only joking around about his dad and actually loves him. But he is pretty serious about being sick of the sweets, and he's also pretty serious when he complains about the clowns his dad puts absolutely everywhere. John assumes his dad does this purely because he likes the clowns, and even goes so far as to assume his dad's day job is some sort of traveling circus performer. John doesn't actually know much about his dad, or about basically anything in his own life. In reality, John's dad is an ordinary businessman, or maybe a private detective whose primary subject of investigation is John himself. This is because John wasn't his naturally born son. In fact, John wasn't technically born at all. He just appeared in Dad's life one day when a meteor crash landed into his mother's prank store, tragically killing her but miraculously containing a baby John within. Dad only collects the clowns because he thinks John likes them, as John has a habit of drawing clowns on the walls of his room in his sleep, presumably as a result of Gamzee's psychic influence on his dream self. Until after Spurb begins, John not only has no recollection of doing these drawings, he also seems to repress his own ability to actually perceive them, only doing so when Rose points them out. John therefore literally can't logically and honestly engage with his reality for most of his early life. Never mind figure out how little he actually knows about it. More than any other character, John is defined by being default, what he himself would probably think of as normal, which in the context of Homestuck means being clueless as to the incredibly weird true nature of himself, his friends, and his world. And because he's fairly inclined towards joking around and thinking about imaginary things like movies, he's also kind of superficial in some ways. He doesn't take much of an interest in his dad's feelings and inner world, for example, and that attitude extends even to his online friends. He jokes angrily about his home life mostly as a joke, to present his own version of his friends' experiences with their guardians, but he doesn't seem to realize that when his friends talk about their lives, they're describing much more serious problems than he deals with. Rose sarcastically commenting on her mom's serious alcoholism and neglect, and Jade cheerfully ignoring her dead grandfather's taxidermied corpse in the living room aren't exactly the same after all. But most glaring is probably his relationship to Dave. Whenever he talks to John, Dave is mostly avoiding thinking about his bro's emotional and physical abuse, which includes lack of access to food, surprise ambushes of physical aggression, and constant non-consensual exposure to and even coerced participation in heavily violent and mature content. During the first half of Homestuck, John and Dave are pretty much perpetually engaging on some level of mutually joking around about how gay the other is, or how funny the concept of gayness is in general. This all feeds Dave's anxiety over his repressed bisexuality, partly because he believes both his older brother and John are straight. This is made worse by the fact that Dave's most prominent teen crush is Jade, who turns out to be John's twin sister, which in turn casts a new light on the jokey admissions that Dave was in love with his best buddy John on some level. All in all, John is, entirely accidentally, kind of a toxic influence on Dave's psyche, simply by existing as a standard of manhood to compare himself unfavorably against. He did unwittingly feed that tendency with jokes about gayness, but at 16, John looks back on that time saying he really did mean it as just a bunch of private jokes between friends. And to his credit, he's pretty supportive, if a little curious, when Dave seems to be in an ambiguous relationship with a guy. Even John's own experience of stuff like sexuality or gender is pretty superficial and fictionalized at this early stage of his life, as he seems to generally think in chaste, traditional terms centered on heterosexual fantasy tropes from movies as it pertains to stuff like love and marriage, in the rare moments that he indulges a romantic interest in anyone along the course of his arc. One way of putting it is that he's the sort of kid who might have joked around about guys having their nails painted as being kind of a gay thing to do, but also wouldn't really protest if his cute and scarily intelligent friends who are girls want to paint his own nails during a sleepover. In fact, he might even be genuinely curious about the experience. So it's entirely reasonable to say that while John could well be heterosexual himself, he was really just parroting Dave's own neuroses about sexuality back at him to keep up with the perceived joke, all the while John himself was totally unaware any malicious judgment could be read into what he was saying at all. After all, how could John tell he was making Dave feel bad when Dave wouldn't even have considered telling him? He's a kid and a friend, not a mind reader. Another idea that Breath relates to is that of frivolity or fun, or in their ultimate form, detachment from worldly circumstance. Breath is literally the aspect of not taking things seriously and joking around, the way John is doing as we discuss here. And one of the hallmarks of the Air class is the idea of a wizard wielding far more magical power than he knows what to do with, or even perceives himself as having. The danger of the wizard or witch is that, through incompetence or malice, power like theirs can change reality for the worse. This is, in a sense, exactly what John does to Dave through his jokes, accidentally making the world seem that much scarier, unwelcoming, and stressful to him even as he convinces Dave that he deserves to feel as terrible and inadequate as he does, by existing in Dave's head as an example of what Dave thinks he's supposed to be. None of this is to say that John himself is a bad person, though. He's ignorant, but mostly because, well, he's just a kid. A kinder and entirely fair way to describe him might be innocent, and that way kids deserve to be by birthright in a society that cares for its people. None of his friends resent him for his slight childishness, after all. But I think we're running out of time, so that's gonna have to be it for now. Until next time, keep rising. Huge thanks go out to my patrons for making this video possible. If you want to help support the channel and come join us at our awesome and growing Discord community, feel free to join us for as little as $1 a month. You can also find me on the r/Hiveswap Reddit and Discord. That's all for now, so thank you again, and as always, keep rising.